to welcome to the first of our insights into faith, the Professor of Public Policy and Chair of the Discipline at the University of the West of Scotland, Professor John Connolly. Professor Connolly is also heavily involved with this initiative in the Archdiocese of Evangelisation. So, John Paul, thanks for joining us today and sharing something of your engagement with faith. Can we dive straight in and ask, where does your faith come from? Obviously, it's now an important part of how you view your life, but has that always been the case? Was it a big part of your childhood also?
Well, I mean, I grew up as part of a Catholic family in Bellsmire in the 80s, and went to a Catholic school. So I guess I was surrounded by the faith as a young person, and it became part of my educational and social life to be with other kids and with other people who were doing similar things, going to the same school, supporting the same football teams, things like that. But I think back then, I think I always had quite an inquiring mind, and I was always asking questions, and I was always interested in faith issues. And I think my memories, and I'll be honest, my memories of growing up in the 80s in the west of Scotland, sometimes when I was thinking about the faith, there was a sense sometimes that there was a kind of dourness about it, and that my grandparents were quite, I'd say quite strict Catholics, but didn't really suffer fools easily, and were often quite, how would you say, traditional, if you know what I mean, in the kind of west of Scotland sense. And I always wondered, why aren't people happier about their faith? Why can't we smile as Catholics a little bit more? And that's something that I really, when I look back in my childhood, I think compared to how I am now, I don't feel that way now. But back then, I kind of felt, there's a bit of a dourness about it. And then I realised that's not what the faith is. And I think it's through education and through development and growing up that you kind of learn more about what the faith means. And for me, in my early years, becoming an altar server was a big change for me. And that was a real eye-opener for me to understand the life of a priest who, worked with Father O'Rourke up there, and to understand that actually we've all got our strengths and weaknesses, we've all got our views, we've all got our ways. And I think that demystified a lot for me, actually being part of the church at an early age. And also it was fun because, many of my friends were also altar servers as well. And I always recall that being part of the parish at St Peter's, there was always an opportunity to get involved in something, and, I remember Father O'Rourke used to have a room downstairs, he used to call it the Guild Room, and he turned it into a pool room for us, so we could go and play pool. And we didn't have much to do back then, in the summer holidays or whatever. So he'd always open his doors to us. So I've always looked back quite fondly on those times. So I think I would say that through my education, Catholic education, and also just through my social life, faith just became part of the everyday.
Has your faith changed as an adult? Well, obviously you're smiling now, so some things have changed for you when it comes to faith. But
I think so. I know so. I mean, my journey is such that, I said at the beginning I've got quite an inquiring mind, and it's probably not an accident that I'm now an academic. I'm a social scientist. And what that means is that you look at issues from a number of different angles, and you become quite critical of what's around you and what's presented in front of you. So for me, the journey often included, perhaps a little bit of drift from the faith because of that mentality. And that lasted for quite a while. But then through time and through life events, and I think through a kind of process of maturity, I realised that the Catholic faith had a huge amount to offer. And it almost felt like coming home when I did become part of the church again. And I don't think I ever, if I'm honest, I don't think I ever actually abandoned faith. God's always been with me. It's always been part of my life. But I think it was almost the Catholic Church. I think in some ways you end up becoming a bit critical sometimes of decisions that are made, or even the organisational aspects of it. And I think we're seeing some of that now in terms of there's lots of people that talk about the challenges with organised religion and what the problems can be around that. But for me, after thinking things through, what I realised that the Catholic Church has more to offer, because if everyone has a view and everything's relative, who's going to rule on those things? So authority and moral authority is something I think the Catholic Church offers, which I don't think I've found elsewhere. So for me, my faith is very important now, but it's the result of a journey. And it's a result of a journey that I would not change, because I think it's led to who I am now. And faith is a very important part of my life now, a significant part of my life. Even though in some ways on paper, as an academic working within an institution in the humanities, there's lots of people that are anti-God. Atheism is a big part of academic life, particularly in the social sciences. So in some ways there would be reasons for me not being like this. But I think it's by God's grace that I'm not.
You spoke there that your faith has developed, and that there was a period there where you perhaps weren't as enthusiastic about the church as you were in your earlier years. So there has been an evolution, a gradual evolution in your faith. But were there moments, were there events that happened that you can pinpoint and say, that led me to making a choice, it led me to making a decision to come back to the church and to practice faith in the Catholic Church, or was it something that just flowed naturally from your journey in life?
I think it's a hard one to pin down. What I would say, I remember a colleague of mine who was actually an evangelical Christian. We used to have lots of conversations about faith issues, and he said to me, "John, I've just got this sense that God's got his hand on you, and he's just, he's never left you, and there's a reason why you're asking all these questions and you're on this journey." And then, if I'm honest, the big change for me, if I was going to pinpoint anything, and it's hard to, but if I was going to, I would say probably the birth of my daughter, Robin. Now, she's nearly 10. When she was born, it was just an almighty. It's hard to explain. I'm not even going to try and put it into words. The feeling, an overwhelming feeling of responsibility, but happiness. And I think that for me, I was thanking God in that moment for the birth of my daughter, and obviously my son came later. But and you think the wonders of creation. It's just something that is difficult to put into words. And I felt that as a father, what kind of responsibility do I have in terms of not just my own faith, but in terms of what I'm teaching my children? So then re-engaging with Mass again, it felt like coming home. It genuinely did. And I think it was a reconnection with the Mass for me. The Mass became very important. The Eucharist became very important. And that as a younger person, I don't think I fully understood what was happening at the Mass. I don't think so. Even though I was an altar boy, strangely enough, I don't think it was ever broken down. And I don't think it was ever communicated to me in a way that I truly understood what was happening. But as a mature person, somebody that reads a lot about the Mass and Christianity and faith, it just all seemed to slot into place. It was like a disorganised jigsaw puzzle that all came together at the Mass. And I think that's something that I would say. My advice would be, if you're on a journey, is open your mind to go to Mass. Just go to Mass and see how it works for you. It might be that you do what I did, and sit at the back of the church for a while, and then see how it goes. And then for me, my journey was go to confession. Then you just lay it all out, go to confession, and then re-engage. And for me, confession could, and I think for others too, it can be seen as quite an intimidating process. But I actually found it quite cathartic in many ways. So that, I would say, that would be the thing for me. My daughter's birth, but then that sense of responsibility, and what came with that was a series of events that led me back to Mass. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it raises another issue for me, and I think it's an issue that people are discussing, especially. I think there is a certain discussion going on amongst atheists or agnostics about people who believe that there's this, what has been referred to as the capax Dei, this capacity for God. And I found it interesting as well that when you were talking about your professional background, that there are a lot of atheists in that that social policy academic discussion. So I imagine that within public policy and politics, that data is an important part of your work, which, it's about mathematics really, isn't it? And the place of mathematics, the use of mathematics to understand our world. And I was reading recently that there's now an algorithm to help students decide what course they should study. It's almost as if we're reducing ourselves at times to mathematical equations, that we can understand ourselves as mathematical equations, or as data, or as statistics. And I'm just wondering, is faith something then that you have to compartmentalize? Is it something separate from your everyday life or from your professional work?
That's an interesting question. I think you're right that I think we need to be cautious about the role of data, and particularly artificial intelligence, as we kind of move into that world. It's quite an uncertain one, ethically and morally. In terms of myself, I'm actually more of a qualitative social scientist, which means working with people and understanding behaviours, why things happen. So in my area, I'm always interested in evaluating government policy, how things work, what doesn't work. Obviously, that does involve an element of quantitative study, using numbers and things. But what I think in terms of being a social scientist is that there's not necessarily, if you don't want there to be, there's not necessarily a disconnection between social science and morality. Because as a social scientist and academic, I have the ability to choose what I do and what I study. So for me, one of the things that I do a lot of work on are things like inequalities, health inequalities. How can society be better? How can we reduce the inequality gap? How can we make people's lives better? Now, I don't think that's morally questionable in the eyes of the Catholic Church or any faith. I think it's just about being careful as to what you seek to do. Now, the difference, I guess, is, social scientists would argue, there's no such thing as a truth. There's no such thing as a objective truth, that you can look at issues from different angles and come up with stronger views over others. For me, that's an element of my life whereby I can find some disagreement, and I think it's possible, it's quite consistent to believe in God, and it's quite consistent to be able to do work which tries to make society a more moral place through your research. And I think that's actually an area of research whereby there could be more study, the morality of social science, the morality of social issues. It's certainly an area that hasn't gained a lot of traction at all in contemporary social science. But I think for me, it's all almost about how you behave with others too. So a lot of the work that I do is mentoring, early career researchers, helping students, supporting them on their own journeys. And I think there's a kind of intrinsic aspect of the faith in all of that, in terms of how you relate to other people and support them as best you can. So I guess it's not always rosy, because you are often working with colleagues that, faith issues are a kind of non-issue in many ways, and you have to be quite careful as to, how you navigate through all of that. But at the same time, I think it was you that said at Mass one time that this idea that, faith is often a personal relationship with God, or a friendship with God. And I think that's something that's been quite important to me, is having that personal connection.
So the faith then, that you see it having a place in public life, and through I suppose, the individual's faith. But as a professional as well, you're also a family man. You've spoken about your daughter, you have a wife, you have another son. And I suppose there are a lot of calls on your time, professionally, family life. Does faith help you put these things together? Does it help you find a unity in your life, so that, I suppose, the work play relationship, isn't it? That's a difficult thing in this pressured world. Life, work. How do you balance things like that? Does faith help you? Does it have something to contribute to that?
I don't know what I'd do without it. That's the honest answer. I think it's the thing that holds everything together. Because I think for me personally, I know people approach things differently, but for me, faith is the thing that holds it all together. Because I think your question was almost like saying, can there be a bit of a disconnect, and is it quite difficult to bridge these different things? Well, I think for me, having my faith allows me to have a degree of contentment in all that I'm doing, even in the challenges. Family life can be challenging, work life can be challenging, but I think it's all about how you, as a person, realise that sometimes that you're not the centre of the universe. For me, that's helpful. It's easy as an academic to develop an ego and to be quite selfish in many ways. So for me, having my faith, I think, makes me a better academic, and I think it makes me a better family man, because it means that I'm not the rule. I don't rule the roost, and I don't, I'm not the one that, well, you do to a point as a father, but you realise your place in the world. And I think intrinsically, I think that has value in the workplace and at home. But also, I think, for me, I'm constantly thankful to God for the gifts that He's given me. And don't get me wrong, like, every career has their ups and downs. Every family has their ups and downs. But if you've not got something to go back to, if you've not got a fundamental home, or I was going to say comfort blanket, but I'm not sure that's the right analogy, but something that's there for you, a framework to keep you moving. And I think it's the teachings of Jesus Christ and the Bible and the Gospels. One of the things that I'm often reflecting on is there's so many questions out there in society just now about meaning. What's a meaningful life? I think we've talked about this before, that Jordan Peterson's work and other people are going around doing lecture tours talking about what's the meaning. And sometimes I just get frustrated, because I think the meaning is there, and it's always been there for me. If you look at the Gospels, if you look at what's the teachings of Jesus, they're very clear. And I think that oftentimes there's a propensity to go and pick up a book on mindfulness, or pick up a book on something else, to try and make you try and get a sense of your life. But I think going back to the gospel stories is a good thing to do, and it's something that I've done. So, and I think that applies to your work life and your family life. Those types of stories, and the way and the messages that come out from those things can be helpful and meaningful.
So your faith isn't just a nice idea that floats around someplace that you have to give time to it to help it develop. And as an adult, as a person with calls on your time in different ways, one of those calls has to be time for prayer, time for reading the Gospels, or else it's just an idea that floats around.
I think so. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there's times when my prayer life has been, well structured and always at the same time every day. It's not. For me, it's much more. It depends on the day. Do I make time for it? Yes. But do I make time for it sometimes when I'm doing other things? Sometimes. But you're trying to devote your full attention. I'll give you an example. I'm a keen runner, so I think I've told you this before. I like running. Well, you should know because I raised some money for the church. So I'm a keen runner. And yesterday I thought, pushed for time. I'm just going to say the rosary to myself when I'm on a run, and when I'm finished the rosary, I'm going to run home. So that's a good half hour running, easy, And okay, I've not got my rosary beads in front of me when I'm running because that could be quite dangerous. But the fact that you're thinking it through, and I think it's almost making a conscious decision to do it, but truly meaning it at the same time. Because I think when I was younger, I think I often did the tokenistic prayer, whereby you just get in a routine of saying it and not actually thinking about the words that you're saying. I think that's been a big difference in my spiritual life as an adult, is thinking much more carefully about the words, what they mean. Don't get me wrong though, I think I'm on a journey with that, because there's so much more opportunity, I think, to develop your prayer life, through meditating on the gospel stories and Jesus' teachings. Those are things that I could do more of. I'm aware of that. But that's a good thing about faith. I don't think it's ever over. You've always got the opportunity to do something more. And I think that's what I love about it.
What you were saying there about saying the rosary while you're running, it reminds me of the old story of a penitent going up to a Dominican and asking, was it all right to smoke while he was saying the rosary? And the Dominican said no, so he went to a Jesuit and said, is it all right for me to say the rosary while I'm smoking? And the Jesuit said, yes, that's a good thing to do when you're smoking. So maybe it's an old story because it involves smoking, so which isn't. But I'd like to go back to something that you said earlier about the search for meaning. And a lot of, I suppose, what we do is to look for answers to the questions in life. I'm sure as well that in your work, a lot of it is finding the right question to ask and trying to find an answer to those questions. What question would you ask God if you could sit him down in front of you?
That's a really interesting question. And I actually think it sounds like a simple question. I think it's actually quite complicated as a question, to me, how I receive it. Because I believe myself that he would know the question I was going to ask before I asked it. And he would know my heart, and he would know me. So my first response to that type of question would be, I think I'd just want to sit with him. I don't think I'd want to ask him anything, That would be my first thought. But if I was hard pressed, I heard a statistic. I think it was, the Professor Brian Cox, the chap that does the space physics and all that. He was talking about the vastness of space. And he was saying that apparently there's more, or they think that there's more planets out there than there are grain of sand in the deserts in the world. Now, to me, when I heard that, my brain just went, I just can't comprehend that, right? I think I'd maybe want to ask God about some of the things that me as a person can't really get my head around and comprehend. So how can this be? You know, tell me about this. How did this happen? Some of these big questions I think I'd be interested in asking. But I think my honest answer would be I think I'd just want to sit with him. I don't think I'd want to ask him much, if I'm honest. I know that's not a great answer,
Well,
but
it raises another question for me then, is in your experience of life, is finding a solution to a problem, is that the answer for us all the time? Is finding an answer to our questions? Is that what life is about? Or is there more to life than just this intellectual satisfaction that we crave? You know, you said you had an inquiring mind. Is that all we are? Is that who we are? You know, is that the sum of what it means to be a human? Understanding, intelligence, answering these questions that we don't yet understand.
I think I think it's part of it. I mean, I think that God gives you gifts, and I think that He would want you to use them, to use your brain. I mean, to become a priest, you had to use your brain, didn't you? To go through education.
Now and again,
Now and again, right? So, but there was a process there, and I'm sure as part of your formation, you were encouraged to question things. I imagine, you know, to make sure that you were really, truly wanting this for yourself. And I think that's a common thing, isn't it? So, but that surely had a place for you, because having that inquiring mind was a necessary part of becoming what you became. So I kind of think it in a similar way, obviously in a different direction, but in a kind of similar way, that I think questions have a role. Will we and should we always have the answers? Well, what I would say is I think there's lots of value from taking a pause. You know, was that hymn? There's a line that says, "Be still, for the glory of the Lord is moving in this place." Be still. I think we don't do enough of that. I don't think we're still enough. This COVID situation, I think, has provided a lot of people, whether they like it or not, with opportunities for sitting in a room, being quiet, and actually reflecting. You're not necessarily always asking questions during those moments. I think what you're trying to do is to contemplate and just to be at peace. Silence is actually a very, very difficult thing to achieve, especially when you've got a young family. You know, silence is not something that is in abundance. So I think just being in the moment, for me, I think being in the moment, I think that's an important part of what makes me happy. It allows for some contemplation around faith issues, of course it does. But the active pursuit of, I need to know this, I need to know the answer to that. Well, surely what faith is, it's about being comfortable in uncertainty. Do we always have to know? I think once you get your head around the fact that uncertainty is a reality, and once you know that, I think that means that you can be more at peace, because it's just the way of the world. And who creates uncertainty? It's people. It's politicians, it's decisions that are made. And I think if you can remove yourself from some of the noise, I think that's something that I would suggest. What do you think, Father? Do you have any your own thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose, I think as the years have passed in my life, I have come to appreciate what you were talking about earlier, simply presence, as providing something that I need. That it's almost as if I need to know, or the side of me that needs to know the solution to all the problems, the answers to all the questions. It's about control and power more and more. Just, you know, perhaps as I get older, there is an urgency because I feel life slipping away. But, you know, the number of years that I have lived are now less than the number of years I could expect to live. But I think in confronting that, there has also been a realization that it is about this relationship that you spoke about earlier on, and that the meaning of life doesn't necessarily come through knowing the answers to things. It comes because of a person that is in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you, kind of thinking about that question, about what you would ask God, obviously you've been a priest for how long now? 35 years?
30 something, yeah.
Yeah.
82
So
since whatever that is.
so I presume you've had lots of chat of opportunity to think about this.
Yeah, yeah.
But do you have anything that you would like to ask God?
No,
No.
no. That doesn't mean I think I know everything. I think I'd just be happy to see him.
Yeah. Yeah. Just sit with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something quite comforting about that.
Yeah. I think that's who we are as human beings, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Excellent.
thank you very much for your time and your insights into faith. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Father. Thanks very much.